joined now by Senator Rosemary Bayer. Rosemary Bayer represents Michigan's 12th district in the Senate and joins us now on the MegaCast. Senator, thanks for being with us today.
Of course, thank you. I really appreciate seeing you again, Tyler.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Let's start off with a bill that you've proposed. It's Senate Bill 454, which would impose state license mandates on all gun purchases. Tell us a little bit about what is being proposed in this bill and where is it currently in the woodwork in terms of being discussed and potentially passed here in Michigan.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question, of course. So the basic idea is something that most people in Michigan agree with, that we ought to have simple background checks for all gun purchases. It's pretty common. In Michigan, we do require a check for and a license for handguns, but we don't do it for all the other types of guns, including, very large, like AR-14 kind of guns. You can buy those without a permit. So this sort of just expands that, and most of the gun owners also approve of the idea of having this. And these are people that want to avoid getting licensed are the ones, or permitted are the ones that we don't want to have them, basically. So let's get our permits in order. It does make a difference in places, other states where they do have universal background checks and permits for all types of guns, firearms. And, we just want to do that same basic thing here. Where it is today, in the current makeup of the legislature, the Republicans are the majority in both the House and the Senate, and therefore we don't get hearings on any kind of gun violence prevention legislation at all. So it's very frustrating for us. There are many things here. We have another example is the extreme risk protection orders, which basically helps people when they are at risk to themselves or others. And that's a pretty significant thing when you think most deaths by gun in the state and the country are suicide. And most deaths by suicide are by gun. I mean, it's very obvious that having some way for families to deal with people who are at extreme risk, whether it's domestic violence or suicide, that seems like a very simple, common sense thing to do. It's got a proven efficacy in other states, like 17% improvements in suicide rates just by doing this one thing. So it's frustrating for us that we can't get any of our gun violence prevention bills to a hearing, let alone a vote. We're kind of waiting for other things to change before we can do that.
We're joined by Senator Rosemary Bayer, state senator from Michigan's 12th district, with us on the MegaCast, and on the front of potential change and things that could maybe make that happen, that would lead toward this bill being up for at least discussion, would be the changing makeup of the state's congressional and Senate districts as a result of the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission and their redistricting maps. Their current proposed drafts would make the state's second largest county here, Oakland County, have 5 Democratic-leaning districts, including 4 that would stretch into parts of Wayne, Macomb, and Washtenaw County. Now, in terms of the Redistricting Commission, they have missed a lot of their deadlines. There's been a lot of frustration surrounding the commission and their work so far. And this first iteration of what they're doing since the constitutional amendment was passed. But we're approaching some deadlines here with the commission, and it doesn't appear that they are going to, and from their own words, that they're going to meet those deadlines. How much of a sense of urgency is there behind them meeting that deadline for you and your colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the House and Senate, who ultimately don't have a whole lot of say in this situation, but
we don't have any say, right?
They're ultimately going to be the ones that are affected by this as they attempt to run for re-election, and as also as their potential opponents in upcoming elections then ultimately are trying to announce their candidacy and declare their candidacy in one district versus another.
Right. Well, so yes, we do need to all understand this is the first time that we've ever done anything like this for districting. I think they're doing a good job, given that they have to figure out every single step of this brand new process. I think they're doing a great job. And yes, they missed their first deadline, which was September 15th, to get the drafts out. As you can see by the action, if you watch, many days they have multiple public meetings now. They are definitely accelerating the work and the process. they're not that far behind. I know it's probably going to be a month, maybe October. I think they actually released a new schedule that is before mid-October to get all the drafts ready for public comment. And then there's some legal checks that they have to go through first. So one of the things you mentioned was that Oakland County has potentially 5 state Senate districts that could, I don't know if they're all leaning Democrat, but close enough, right? Toss up kind of things, which is good. I mean, that's the whole point of this exercise. And if you look at the numbers of people who are leaning Democrat outside of elections, that is consistent. There are more Democrat-leaning voters right now in Oakland County than there are Republicans. So it kind of makes sense to do that. But that being said, one of the steps in their process, first is the legal check, right, on things like majority-minority districts, making sure that we match the federal guidelines, rules for that. But then also partisan checks to make sure that what they're doing really is fair for the people of Michigan. Because the people of Michigan are who wins and loses in this, right? It's not actually those of us who are running. We do care a lot, mostly because we want to make sure that we're representing the communities that know us, that we know, right? I am happy to adjust a little bit, even move if I need to a little bit, to stay with the people that primarily make up my district, right? I don't want to move to a place that no one knows me, nor do I know them, right? To be a good representative, I need to have some familiarity with the people that are there. So that's, but that's kind of a personal thing. That being said, it really is about the people of Michigan. And I think it's worth an extra few weeks to make sure that they take the time they need to do this as fairly as possible, right? And keep that goal of, we're going to do this for the people. It's not for the politicians. And as someone who volunteered with Voters Not Politicians that year, when we did so much work on that, I'm a pretty big believer in the process. And I think they're going to be fine. I know it's been hard and they're working hard to catch up. But I think they're doing a great job. I really do. We'll see what happens in the end if nothing's done, but lots of things are starting to coalesce, and we're getting lots of calls from our constituents and people are worried. And the one thing I would really want to say loud and clear is it's not finished, and you still have multiple opportunities to provide your input. And the one thing that is very clear in the results that we've seen so far in the different drafts that have been coming out, they are listening to the people who speak at those meetings. It really does matter. This really is your opportunity to make sure that you have a voice. So I highly recommend it. I know they're coming out here next week to a session at Oakland University, close to where we are. I highly recommend people go and be a part of that and say what you think.
You can learn more information on those upcoming meetings in the public that are in person and virtual from the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission by going to michigan.gov/MICRC. That is michigan.gov/MICRC. We're joined by Senator Rosemary Bayer on the MEGAcast. She is the senator from Michigan's 12th district with us today. And Senator, earlier this month, just about 10 days ago, actually, it was released in Bridge Magazine. You co-wrote an opinion article with Senator Jeff Irwin from Ann Arbor entitled "The Time is Now for Michigan to Invest in Climate Resiliency Plans." And so that brings me to a topic that's been a big discussion here in the state of Michigan over the summer, particularly a couple of months back as we had multiple 100-year storms, 100-year floods, 1,000-year floods, however they're being worded by one person or another. And on top of that, we continue to have severe weather that's knocking people's power out in a lot of common areas that are seeing continuous power outages for extended periods of time. So when you say that the time is now for Michigan to invest in climate resiliency plans, what can be done right now? What investments can and should be made right now from our legislative leaders and on the local level to combat what we're experiencing now with climate change and with more severe weather patterns than we've ever seen before?
Wow, that's great. I'm really excited that you brought this into the conversation today. So Senator Irwin and I and a number of other senators and House representatives put together a package of initiatives and bills. Some of it is budget, some of it is legislative changes for really this first set of resiliency packages. So We're focused on, one of the things, the time is now because we must at this point acknowledge that this climate change thing is real and it's here to stay. We have lived through this summer, one 1,000-year storm and 3 100-year storms. So we can now call them monthly storms as far as it looks, right? This isn't going to end. Now our task is to do two things, right? We need to focus on building resilience to deal with what we already know is here, right? So the climate change that is already upon us, we are not going to stop that or roll that backwards. So we need to build infrastructure that is strong enough, that is resilient enough to be able to handle changes in our weather and the things that we know because we live where we live, right? We live in the water state. We know that water issues are a huge part of our infrastructure needs to be able to be resilient for these storms. So part of the proposals coming out related to that big announcement, this big shift for us in the legislature, have to do with building infrastructure improvements and expansion to deal with water. So for example, in Southeast Michigan, in many communities, we still share a single pipe for both sewer and stormwater. And so when storms get heavy, the rain comes fast and the storm water overflows, that means it mixes with the sewage water, and that's how it ends up in people's basements. So the infrastructure need there is to separate those two things and to expand the capacity for handling what happens when we have those severe storms, right? That's one of the pieces of the infrastructure valve. The other, there are many things in here that we need to work on. One of it is that reliable electrical supply. And sometimes the issues that we're having there have to do with water, right? Some of the things that happened with outages had to specifically do with those floods and the storms. But the storms also bring us trees that come down and other issues with the electricity supply. And so we have had multiple meetings and multiple meetings to come working on with DTE, with consumers on how do we build electrical supply infrastructure in a way that it is resilient to these storms. And so I know there's one of the things we talk about is burying electrical lines, and that is part of any plan moving forward, but it also will take a lot longer to accomplish. Then we need to do some other things at the same time. So while we work on, the highest impact for burying energy, and part of that, by the way, is infrastructure as the roads get improved, to make sure that we use that opportunity when a road is cracked open, to look at burying electrical lines and burying stormwater pipes and other kinds of infrastructure while we do that, right? Make that more efficient. But there's other opportunities as electricity providers to move electricity more toward distributed storage models. So within a community, places where there are banks of stored energy that can be leveraged so that if you do have an outage over, maybe 10 miles away, it doesn't impact me this far over, right? If there's ways for them to better move toward a distributed production model where communities actually produce electricity and work with the big suppliers, right, to make sure that everybody shares the infrastructure in a more efficient way while not hurting the business models, really. It's DT and consumers are different kinds of business, right? They're public utilities.
Yes.
They need to be whole too, right? So knowing that people putting solar on their rooftops is something that we could encourage people to do to reduce the likelihood of them losing their power supply, that needs to fit into the grid as a whole. So working on those kind of issues with those big utilities is another important part of building resilience into the plan. And then the other big piece is to actually work on how do we stop generating more greenhouse gases so that the impact that we see today from climate change isn't magnified 4 or 5 times if we don't do anything to stop making it worse, right? So that's the second phase, is also working with those power generators, but there's other things too. There's agricultural issues and automotive issues and different parts of our world that contribute to greenhouse gas and to climate change. And so working on all the different ways that we can be a part of the solution for that as opposed to a contributor.
We're joined by Senator Rosemary Bayer. She is Michigan's senator from the 12th district with us on the MegaCast. Senator, just another minute with you before we'll say goodbye today. Anything else that would be important for our audience in your district and the 12th district to know at this time?
So the last thing I would ask everyone to pay attention to and be active if you are so inclined on the protecting democracy front. I know I've talked in the past about the anti-voter bills. The Republican legislatures are potentially going to drive a voter override, is what I would call it. In 2018, we passed a number of really fabulous changes to give people more access to voting, make it easier for people to vote. An override of a petition initiative that they're not allowing to go to the voters means that they will simply adopt something that we did not vote in. In fact, it opposes the very things that we voted in 2018. They want to turn that into law using a kind of a hole in our state constitution. It is truly circumventing the will of the Michigan voters. So we will all be speaking about this and asking you to stand up, tell your representatives that if you don't think this is a good idea, I mean, we voted for that overwhelmingly a couple of years ago. We want to keep those rights. So don't hesitate to let people know that you agree with that if you think that's the right thing to do. So that's a big one, and that's coming up real soon.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your time. Thank you for your insight today on a number of issues here in the state of Michigan. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tyler.